Junji Ito's Tomie may not be the famed mangaka's best work, or even my personal favorite. However, this anthology series is one I find immensely compelling. It puts on display a philosophy found throughout Junji Ito's work, how he takes a look at something from the inside out and distorts it, turns that which is often considered mundane or ordinary into that which is unsettling, horrifying. Tomie stands out in this particular regard because she takes an already dubious concept, that of the femme fatale, and presents it in a way I can only describe as bizarre. In classic film noir, where the term was popularized in the modern sense, a femme fatale is an attractive and seductive woman who ultimately brings disaster to men who get involved with her. She whispers temptatious propositions of morally reprehensible acts into the ears of poor saps struck dumb with love, uses sexuality and the promise of greater rewards to corrupt otherwise decent, or at least moderately compromised individuals to her will. This is the idea that Tomie plays with, one which is indicative to more than just film noir, be it vampires, succubi, as well as a whole host of other myths, including Lilith, Eve, Medusa, to an extent, and many, many more. Tomie comes into the lives of various men, twists them around her finger, and eventually brings about their ruin. How she does this, however, is what makes the story stand out, what I find unique. Tomie doesn't necessarily seduce the men she comes across. In fact, she by all rights lacks any of the personality traits associated with a femme fatale. She may have them on the surface, but they fall apart once put into practice. Tomie is a blatant liar, and a bad one at that, with absolutely no subtlety or tact. Men believe her not because they're convinced, but because they can't help themselves. She also doesn't string them along with kind words or something more tempting. Amazingly enough, Tomie never uses sexuality to her advantage. Outside of allusions to her beauty, it's never brought up, used as a bargaining chip to get her way. She never, gives that good suck. Men fall for Tomie not because of anything she herself does. Her personality is actively detrimental for what she's supposed to be, and would drive people away under normal circumstances. She's utterly detestable, yet there are those who flock to her regardless. Unlike most stories which include a femme fatale type character, where those the woman is involved with are making a conscious choice, the individuals Tomie encounter often can't control what they're doing. Men catch a glimpse of her, are compelled through supernatural means to obey, and wind up ruining their lives in a manner that's a warped reflection of the character type in question. Though she sometimes demands they kill, what truly brings about their downfall, induces an incurable madness, is an uncontrollable desire to kill Tomie herself. A desire which sees the woman chopped to pieces, and for said pieces to regrow back into Tomie. Choosing to kill someone is horrific in its own right. Being forced to by means out of your control, and doing so to one you presumably love, is something else entirely. Those that come across Tomie are truly helpless, are doomed from the start, and that's what makes her stories terrifying. With about 20 some odd chapters, whose publication range over the span of a few years, the anthology series has 3 distinct parts which can be readily identified. You have Tomie's death and her becoming a monster, something that is isolated to the first chapter, which is then followed up by a long stretch where the girl herself is trying to understand what she's become, and her attempts to fix it. Unlike a lot of other Junji Ito stories, Tomie isn't inherently malicious. She has a motivation for what she's doing that, though it doesn't justify her actions, does at the very least make them understandable. This veneer, however, is eventually chipped away chapter by chapter, prompting Tomie to give up trying to undo what was done and simply embrace who she now is. The stories involving her take a turn for the worst, become infinitely darker since she holds nothing sacred, doesn't care anymore. Now, the first chapter in the anthology isn't my favorite. It has a few too many leaps into crazy man logic before that actually starts to make any sense. It, however, does set up everything that is to come. Before becoming a monster, Tomie was a high school girl that had been having an affair with her teacher. The other girls in class hated her. However, she was popular with guys. During a school trip, Tomie attempted to escalate the affair with her teacher, said she was pregnant and would tell the whole school if he didn't divorce his wife. This would then lead to an argument, with things quickly getting out of hand. Tomie would eventually fall off a steep cliff and presumably die, resulting in an absurd chain of events I have a few gripes with. When the teacher demands his students use their conveniently on-hand woodshop tools to hack Tomie apart, I had a hard time buying it as a reasonable course of action, especially after it's revealed that the girl is in fact still alive. I get why the teacher would want to kill her, just find it hard to believe all of his students would go along with murdering a fellow classmate, even if it was one they didn't necessarily like. After what the class believes was Tomie's death, the girl in question would mysteriously appear before them a few days later, apparently none the wiser as to what had happened. One by one, those actively involved in her killing would lose their mind, resulting in either their death or arrest. Initially, this comes off as a fairly straightforward ghost story, someone wrongfully killed coming back to enact revenge. However, the chapter's final page reveals this to not be the case. The Tomie which haunted the class, so to speak, wasn't a spirit but Tomie herself. She had regrown from one of the bloody pieces left in the wake of her death, pieces which her class had scattered across the countryside, resulting in an unsettling ending, and the implication that there are more of her out there. The first chapter of Tomie in particular doesn't stack up all that well when compared to later ones. However, it does a great job at establishing the core ideas behind the concept, be it the madness Tomie induces, or how she can come back to life. Where it fails, however, at least in relation to later chapters, is how it doesn't capture that uniquely overwhelming sense of helplessness, of dread this series is all about. It might be my least favorite part of the anthology, however, it's still an enjoyable read in its own right. Though it was created early in his career for a competition, Junji Ito had a clear vision for what he wanted to do. His second attempt with Tomie, however, is a dramatic and rather impressive improvement. The story arc, which starts with Photograph and encompasses a few chapters thereafter, is probably my favorite as a whole. Not the scariest by any means, or the most dread-inducing, but by far one of the more entertaining. What immediately caught my attention was the arc's protagonist, Photo Girl. No, I do not remember her name. She's underhanded and a bit scummy, quick-witted and ordinary, but decent to her core. She's the polar opposite of Tomie, a girl who tries to come off as sincere and intelligent, but is in fact vindictive and nowhere near as smart as she thinks she is. Photo Girl is a great foil for her arrogant opposition. She can outplay the domineering monster and cut straight through her nonsense. She is also a girl, a woman. Tomie holds little to no supernatural sway over her. There's no compulsion to follow her every whim, no madness, which gives this portion of the anthology a unique component. From what we gathered with the first chapter, we have an idea that Tomie can influence men, drive them crazy. However, instead of experiencing that directly with our protagonist, we're watching it from afar. Tomie is an antagonistic threat, not an insidious corruption. Case in point is the inciting incident for the story itself. Photogirl is taking pictures of her classmates and selling them to those who are interested. Tomie catches wind of this and decides to mess with our heroine simply because she can. Though there is no real rhyme or reason for doing so, Tomie winds up getting Photogirl in deep trouble with the school, resulting in her getting suspended. Save for her quick wits, Photogirl herself has no recourse to stop Tomie from ruining her life. She was helpless in the face of that situation since her enemy, so to speak, had the support of those with authority. There was no one to turn to for help. This, however, doesn't go unanswered for long, since Photogirl had discovered something about Tomie which becomes a staple of the series. When photographed, Tomie's true self is revealed, her monstrous nature made clear for all to see. Photogirl capitalizes on this discovery and scatters a ton of these pictures across the school, catching Tomie by surprise and enraging her to no end. This then leads to yet another instance of helplessness, where Photogirl is attacked by those enthralled by Tomie. Though these are individuals she knows, any attempt made on Photogirl's behest to reason with her assailants falls upon deaf ears. They won't listen to what she has to say because they effectively can't. Despite making it back home, a place most would consider safe, she's approached by Tomie and witnesses the girl's eventual beheading. This is then followed by Photogirl herself narrowly avoiding being murdered, yet, unfortunately, becoming the prime suspect in a murder case. Because the situation is so utterly absurd, no one believes what she's saying. Once more, Photogirl has no one to turn to. It's a sense of helplessness different from that which those enthralled by Tomie face, but one which is terrifying, regardless. This notion in particular is why I enjoy this story as much as I do. Though Photogirl cannot rely upon others, she can still rely upon herself. She doesn't take all the crap being thrown at her lying down, and faces it as best as she can. Despite my praise, the ending of this particular story arc doesn't land nearly as well as its beginning or even middle. It delves into some territory future chapters don't really touch, at least in this manner. There's some really weird body snatching and science experiment stuff going on, which doesn't make the most sense. A girl being entombed in a suit of armor is just bizarre, feels out of place, and not in a good way. You can tell Junji Ito is still trying to figure a few things out. However, as a conclusion to Photogirl's story, I'd say it's still a satisfying one. It's thematic and fitting, leading to yet another concept indicative to Tomie as a whole. Though the girl can come back from a lot, fire can do her in for good. Despite Photograph not instilling into me the same sense of dread that later chapters would, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention its outstandingly horrific body horror. Because Tomie can regrow from any part of her left unburnt, we get some kinda creatively disturbing images throughout this arc. Images which have stuck with me far more than anything else in this series. Tomie growing out of the carpet, for instance. A part of her skull, or possibly even her brain beginning to slide off, is, something I'm not forgetting anytime soon. Also, just to point out a single moment I enjoyed, Yamazaki breaking free of Tomie's grasp and protecting Photogirl was something I found rather cute. Heightens the tragedy concerning the entire situation. If not for Tomie, the pair would have had a normal life. However, they can no longer go back to the way they used to be, the people they were. Simply too much has happened. That unto itself is another facet to Tomie, and just Junji Ito as a storyteller. Even when the characters of a story survive, the ending is never happy. There's always an underlying darkness. What happened can never be undone. Nobody can understand what these individuals went through unless they themselves lived it. The chapter dubbed Gathering puts this on display the best, and is another unique point in the series. After losing his wife, a man named Umihara goes to a bizarre meeting at his friend's behest. What he finds is a large gathering of men who are all fanatically waiting on Tomie. Seeing yet another individual to toy with, Tomie approaches Umihara but is swiftly rebuked, much to her surprise. Save for a handful of exceptions, each with unique circumstances, Tomie has never been rejected by a man before. This fact alone catches her attention, resulting in her minions kidnapping Umihara. What happens from here on out is an exchange between the pair that reveals a few things concerning Umihara, but a ton about Tomie herself. Much like in previous chapters, the woman attempts to lie about her situation and manipulate the man before her. However, unlike these chapters, Umihara buys none of it. He knows Tomie isn't some damsel in distress and calls her out for being a bad liar. He feels nothing toward the woman because they just met. There's no love between them, and he's perplexed as to why there would be. Tomie has a hard time accepting this and gets angry. For someone who claims to love only herself, it's odd she gets as worked up as she does. Begs the question as to whether or not that notion unto itself is a lie. That in actuality, the woman wants someone to genuinely care for her despite what she claims openly. Umihara's simple rejection and how Tomie responds to it reveals, or possibly just hints, at a side to this character we have yet to see. Something to note, however, is, eventually, Umihara does start to become more receptive to Tomie as the chapter progresses, but only after she stops lying to him, when she begins being honest and rather straightforward. This, however, isn't explored any further, since, jealous at Umihara's special treatment, Tomie's weird collection of cultists lash out in the traditional manner and cut her to pieces before the man's very eyes. Though he himself is never driven to madness like the others, this incident in particular leaves a lasting impression on Umihara. Despite keeping his sense of self, dreams of the wife he lost were now replaced with that of Tomie and her death. Though this could simply be the lingering aftermath of good old-fashioned trauma, there is a subtle implication that something more supernatural has begun to affect Umihara, that Tomie's influence will remain with him for the rest of his days. A few stories across the anthology series touch on the idea of people resisting Tomie's advances, and her pursuing them because of this. Photograph, with Yamazaki snapping back to reality, sees the first hints of this. Same holds true for Revenge, where the individual in question stabs Tomie out of fear, as opposed to madness. Anytime the subject is broached, chiefly the chapters involving the ugliest brother of 5 ignoring Tomie, and the hospital patient who liked a girl before body horror shenanigans went down, seem to indicate that those with genuine intentions can resist the series' titular monster, whereas those consumed with lust cannot. Junji Ito is a great artist. Tomie looks better and better from one chapter to the next. However, I wouldn't consider her the most beautiful woman in existence, which I'm fairly certain is the point when keeping these stories I've mentioned in mind. Tomie isn't physically the epitome of beauty, but rather a being that plays off of men's desires. If said men can keep them in check, not allow themselves to be driven or consumed by base instinct, then she has little to no power over them. Keeping that in mind, I'm forced to wonder why Tomie takes an interest in those that are disinterested. It could be something she sees as a challenge, a unique toy to play with, but I'm not completely sure. We know Tomie claims to love no one but herself. However, after being killed by the man she loved, and numerous men who claimed as much, perhaps she actually does want someone, namely an individual who isn't driven by desire, lust. Perhaps Tomie wants someone who likes her for who she is, awful personality, monstrous nature, and all. Now, I wish I could end it there, give Tomie the benefit of the doubt, but I can't, since there's a certain story in particular which is genuinely terrifying and blows my last statement out of the water. A chapter so dreadful, it made me genuinely uncomfortable for all the right reasons. Let's talk about Boy. A lot of great horror is often allegorical, has a deeper meaning just hidden beneath the surface. Junji Ito's work, however, is usually pretty literal. What you see is what you get. For almost all of Tomie, this is the vibe I get, save for the chapter in question. Time and again, we've seen Tomie act vindictive and cruel, do awful things to reach some sort of end. In Boy, though, she is downright malicious, is preying upon and toying with a child. Every time I read this particular chapter, I'm struck with a sickening sense of sadness. get an underlying feeling that this story is about molestation and the lasting damage it can cause. While playing on the beach, a young boy is drawn to a cave where a brutalized Tomie resides. She is in the midst of healing and can't exactly fend for herself, so upon meeting the boy, she begins manipulating him. What stands out here is these final few panels, followed by what happens on the next page. Tomie asks the boy to visit her every day so they can play, to tell no one, and gives him a kiss as a reward. Though we don't see it outright, the implication is apparent. The boy was kissed, and if his expression is any indicator, he didn't want to be. From here on out, with the child now under her thrall, Tomie begins making demands of the boy, be it to steal food or clothing. Each time he accomplishes a given task, Tomie rewards him, be it with a kiss or by playing with him. Once more, take a look at the boy's expression. While playing, he looks terrified as opposed to enjoying himself. After being kissed, he looks miserable. What's worse is she begins to drive a wedge between the boy and his family, alienate him while claiming she's his new mother. It's immensely disturbing and only gets worse from here. Much like previous chapters, the boy eventually develops a desire to kill Tomie, resulting in a chain of events which sees him murder another man under the woman's thumb. For seemingly no reason, Tomie tears the boy's family apart, breaks him mentally, and completely ruins his life. She turns him into a criminal, a murderer, and is the ultimate reason he's killed. Unlike other instances where what Tomie is doing makes some sort of sense, this time around, she is downright evil. She took advantage of a child, isolated him from those who actually cared, and there was nothing the boy could do to stop it. With this chapter, Junji Ito punctuated the series' overarching sense of helplessness with a subject matter all too real, making the story incredibly twisted and impactful. Even if the allegory was accidental, something I can easily imagine to be the case, I can read too deeply into things, the effect remains the same. We as the audience come to feel an overwhelming sense of dread as we watch a child lose both his innocence and future through no fault of his own. We see that Tomie holds nothing sacred and understand full well there's nothing redeeming about her. Tomie is a monster, plain and simple. The horror of Tomie is that which stems from a lack of control, be it over oneself or a given situation. It comes from a feeling of helplessness, where someone knows the individual they're dealing with is dangerous, revolting, yet they can't help themselves but play with fire. Unlike other monsters who victims can't often physically escape, Tomie is one an individual can easily walk away from, but for some reason can't. There's nothing enticing or seductive about her. In fact, her personality would normally push people away. However, men are drawn to her regardless. Tomie is a weird time, but well worth the few hours it takes to go through it. The concept behind the anthology is a unique one, a distortion of a classical character archetype, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. If you want your Halloween to be a bit more spooky, you can't go wrong with giving this series a shot. But with that said, I've been Bufar191. Tell me what you thought in the comments down below. I'll see all you guys next time. Goodbye.